Item of business is a statement by Nicola Sturgeon on COVID-19. The First Minister will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's statement is a bit different to those I've made in recent weeks, mainly because the most important decisions for the period ahead were set out on Saturday. I will, of course, reiterate those decisions and the reasons for them in the course of this statement. However, I'll also share with the Chamber the latest information we have on the new strain of COVID that is causing us such concern, and I'll reflect on the ongoing impact of the closure of the UK-French border to accompanied freight. However, I'll start as usual with a brief summary of the latest COVID statistics. The total number of positive cases reported yesterday was 1,316. That represents 7.5% of all tests carried out, and the total number of cases now stands at 114,366. 1,045 people are currently in hospital. That's a decrease of 33 from yesterday, and 60 people are currently in intensive care, one more than yesterday. I also regret to report that in the past 24 hours, a further 43 deaths have been registered of patients who first tested positive over the previous 28 days, and the total number of deaths under that measurement is now 4,326. Obviously, these figures continue to be a really sharp reminder of the grief, heartbreak and the overall toll that this virus is causing. And once again, my deepest thoughts and condolences go to all those who have lost a loved one. Today's statistics, like those we've been reporting over recent weeks, underline, I think, a couple of points. Firstly, COVID is still circulating in Scotland at a higher level than we would wish it to be. However, and I appreciate this may be less obvious, the case data from recent weeks also shows that the levels system has until now been effective. In late October, Scotland was recording more than 160 new cases per 100,000 people an average every week. 2 weeks ago, it had fallen to 100 and is now around 116 per 100,000. That level of incidence is significantly lower than in other parts of the UK. For example, it is around half that of England and around a fifth of the case incidence currently seen in Wales. However, after a sustained period of decline, our case numbers are now more volatile again and indeed have risen by around 15% in the past couple of weeks. The numbers of people with COVID who are in hospital and ICU have also risen slightly again after a period of quite marked decline. Now, in any circumstances, these trends would be a cause for concern and they would merit close analysis, but they would probably not, on their own, justify the actions that I announced on Saturday. What has changed our thinking and approach significantly is the information we have received over the past 8 days or so about the presence and impact of a new variant of COVID. Now, it is important to stress again today that there is no evidence at this stage that this new variant causes more severe illness than previously circulating strains, nor is there any evidence so far that it will undermine the effectiveness of either vaccines or treatments. But this new variant does seem to be much more transmissible, perhaps up to 70% more transmissible, which means that it can spread far more quickly and easily. As a result, there is now a significant degree of confidence amongst experts that it increases the R number and that the scale of increase could be 0.4. Now, given that the R number in Scotland is already hovering around 1, this is obviously a very real concern. Also, analysis was published yesterday by the Office of National Statistics of the results of the weekly ONS COVID infection survey, which uses PCR testing on a random sample of people in Scotland and looked for a proxy marker known as the S-gene dropout. There is continuing technical work underway on the use of the S-gene dropout as a marker for this new strain, and it is not absolutely definitive that every case with this marker will be the new variant. However, this analysis suggests that in the week beginning 9th December, around 14% of positive cases in Scotland already had this S-gene dropout. This compares to just 5% at the end of November. And it's not unreasonable to assume that the proportion may be higher by now, and Public Health Scotland is carrying out further analysis. Now, 14% is, of course, still a significantly lower level than England, where it is thought that the new variant already accounts for 36% of cases, and maybe even higher in London and the South East. However, the very rapid spread in London and the South East serves as a warning of what we could face here if we do not take firm action to suppress the virus. We have a real concern that without significant countermeasures, we could be facing another period of exponential growth as we enter the new year. That would mean many more people catching COVID, and even without this new strain causing more severe illness, that would result in many more people needing hospital and intensive care treatment, and that would put an enormous strain on the NHS, and of course it would also lead to much more loss of life. To be blunt, Presiding Officer, that is what we have to act now to stop. Now, in an ideal world, it would be good to wait a few weeks until preliminary analysis becomes more concrete and confidence intervals narrow. But if the concerns we have now prove to be well-founded, it would by then be too late. We have learned that we must act firmly in the face of this virus. And that is why we announced significant additional measures on Saturday. I know how tough these are, but we believe they are essential to avoid an extremely serious deterioration in the situation as we move into the new year. Let me recap now on what those measures are. Firstly, Orkney, Shetland, the Western Isles and the other relatively remote islands that have seen restrictions relaxed in recent weeks will move to level 3 from 1 minute past midnight on Boxing Day. However, the rest of Scotland will move at that point to level 4 for a period of 3 weeks. There will be a review after 2 weeks. This means, for example, that hospitality will require to close with the exception of takeaway services, and so too will non-essential retail. Now, there are 3 further points that I think it is important for me to make today about level 4 restrictions. Firstly, given the severity of the situation we face and the need to limit interactions as much as possible, we intend to define essential retail more narrowly than we have done recently. In short, that means homeware stores and garden centres will be classed as non-essential and will therefore require to close with the exception of click and collect. Second, in level 3 and level 4, the law currently prohibits non-essential travel outside your own local authority area. However, for those living in level 4 areas, which from Saturday will be the vast majority of us, our strong advice is to stay as local as possible and to stay at home as much as possible. And we will be considering in the days ahead whether we need to place that advice in law. And third, and more generally, as more evidence of the impact of this new strain becomes available, we will consider whether there is a need to strengthen level 4 restrictions any further. Again, I need to be blunt with Parliament and the public. The current level 4 restrictions are not as stringent as the March lockdown, and that up until now has been a good thing. However, it does seem that we may be facing a virus that spreads much faster now than in March, so we do need to consider whether the current level 4 restrictions will be sufficient to suppress it in the weeks ahead. This will be analysis that the Government undertakes urgently as our understanding of the new strain of the virus develops, and I will of course keep Parliament updated as necessary, including over the recess period if that is necessary. The second decision we took on Saturday was to maintain the current ban on travel to and from Scotland and the rest of the UK. Again, this was a decision we did not take lightly. But as we seek to suppress this new strain here in Scotland, we must also guard against importing more of it from areas where it is already circulating more widely. This travel ban will therefore remain in place right throughout the festive period, including, unfortunately, on Christmas Day. And as the Chief Constable has set out, the police will be enhancing their enforcement of it. We also regrettably tightened other restrictions for the Christmas period. It is now possible to meet in a bubble of up to 8 people from 3 households on Christmas Day only and within Scotland only, rather than over a 5-day period across the UK. However, our strong advice remains not to meet indoors at all if possible. When it comes to indoor celebrations this year, by far the safest option is to stay in your own house with your own household. If you do plan to see people from other households on Christmas Day, please try to stay outdoors if you can. But if you are indoors, please keep the numbers as low and the duration as short as possible. Keep a safe distance as far as possible. Wash your hands and surfaces regularly and keep windows open. Presiding Officer, I can't tell you how sorry I am to be standing here saying these things, and there is no part of me oblivious to the impact of this. I don't just understand that impact, I feel that impact as everybody else does. But this is necessary to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe at this extremely difficult and challenging time. And I want to thank everyone today from the very bottom of my heart for making these sacrifices. The final but extremely significant decision announced on Saturday relates to schools. Keeping schools open has been a priority for the Scottish Government since August, and it remains a priority as far as possible. However, these recent developments and all aspects of them mean we need to take a precautionary approach, and we also need to give ourselves some time to further assess the situation. As a result, we've taken the very difficult decision, difficult for us to take, but more difficult for young people and parents affected, to delay the start of the new school term. Schools, of course, had been due to reopen from 5th January onwards. Now they will reopen from 5th January for children of key workers and for particularly vulnerable children only. Local authorities identified key workers at an earlier stage in the pandemic. An updated guidance was published last night. For all other pupils, the school term will start on 11th January. However, the first week of term at least will take place online. At this stage, our intention is that schools will get back to normal from the 18th of January. But of course, we will require to keep this under review. Presiding Officer, I know all of these measures are harsh and they are extremely difficult for individuals and for businesses. For so many businesses, I know that these announcements represent a horrible end to a terrible year. Financial support will remain available for businesses affected, and the Finance Secretary is urgently assessing what more the Scottish Government can do, particularly for the sectors most acutely affected. I also know that the developments of the past few days, while worrying for everyone, will cause particular anxiety for those who are shielding. The Chief Medical Officer has written to everyone on the shielding list who will enter level 4 on Saturday, setting out the advice that applies to you. This advice has also been sent by SMS text message and is available on the Government website. The level 4 advice is of course restrictive, but it still encourages you to find a balance that is right for you. Among other things, the letter will advise that if you are on the shielding list and you cannot work from home, you should speak to your employer, who must put precautions in place to keep you safe. However, the letter also serves as a footnote which can be used to obtain statutory sick pay if you cannot safely go to work. The letter also provides details of how to get help, for example, if you have difficulties accessing food or groceries or other supplies in this period. Please don't hesitate to ask for support if you need it. Finally, Presiding Officer, on this matter, I know many people may question if these measures are strictly necessary, especially given Scotland's relatively low level of prevalence compared to other parts of the UK. My firm judgment is that they are absolutely necessary. They're not simply at this stage a response to our current situation, but they are necessary precautionary measures to avoid a significant deterioration in our situation caused by this new strain of the virus over the next few weeks. In short, these measures are essential to protect our National Health Service and to save lives. I do not expect a single person to be happy about them, but I do ask everyone to try to understand that these decisions would not have been taken if we did not consider them to be essential. Presiding Officer, before I close today, I want, of course, to address the impact of the decisions by a number of other countries to close their borders to the UK in response to the new strain of the virus. By far the most serious impact derives from the closure of the UK-French border to accompanied freight. I took part in a COBRA meeting on this issue yesterday and also chaired our own Resilience Committee. I was hoping that there would be another COBRA meeting again later today, but at the time I came to the Chamber, that was not yet confirmed, but I do hope that will happen. This situation is serious, it is urgent, and for our food exporters, it is rapidly deteriorating. It needs the UK Government to reach agreement with France without delay to get freight moving again. There is simply no time to lose. I want to stress at the outset that we have no concerns about medicine supplies at this stage. That was something covered in detail both at COBRA and at the Scottish Government Resilience Committee yesterday. And we also have no immediate concerns about food supplies. Supermarkets are well stocked, and so there is absolutely no need for anyone to buy more than planned in the run-up to Christmas. Of course, if the situation is not resolved in the next day or so, we may start to see pressure on some fresh produce after Christmas, but that is not a concern right now, and I hope it will not arise at all. However, what is of real and immediate concern is the impact on our food exporters, especially the Scottish seafood sector. This is the peak time of year for seafood exports, and the Christmas export trade is now almost certainly lost. That is devastating for our world-class seafood businesses, and they do need and will get our support. We are liaising with the sector on the need for immediate financial support, and I also raised the issue of compensation at COBRA yesterday. However, what the sector needs most of all is for the UK Government and France to agree a protocol to get freight moving again without delay. If that doesn't happen almost immediately, the sector stands to lose its New Year export trade too. Now, I very much hope a protocol will be agreed between the UK and France today. Indeed, I hope that we may even get movement during this statement, but that is not yet certain. And what is even less certain is how long any agreement will then take to be put into operation. The Scottish Government is and will continue to press the UK Government to give this the utmost priority, and we stand ready to help in any way we can. Since any solution is likely to include mass testing of freight drivers, that willingness to help includes a willingness, if the terms of the agreement allow, to provide testing facilities for our sector here in Scotland. I want to assure the sector, Parliament and the public generally that I and my ministers will remain fully and actively engaged on these matters until they are resolved. Presiding Officer, let me conclude. We are now, of course, just 3 days away from Christmas, and I am acutely aware that today's update has not had a festive feel to it at all. We have known that our path out of this pandemic would not always be smooth and straightforward, and that it would bring dark days and challenging periods. Saturday, I know, felt like a very dark and difficult day for all of us. And I know it's not possible for me to take away the heavy burden we all feel just with some hopeful words. But I do nevertheless want to end on a hopeful note, because hard though it is to feel it right now, there is hope on the horizon, and we must try not to lose sight of it. First, it is possible that we have found out about this new variant of COVID at an early enough stage to take effective preventative action. By moving quickly, we may be able to minimise its worst impacts. And all of us have a role to play in that. I know that it sometimes seems as though we're powerless in the face of this virus, but we are absolutely not. None of us can guarantee that we won't get or transmit it, but all of us can make choices that make that less likely. And that remains true of this new variant. It seems to transmit more easily, but it can still be stopped in its tracks by the facts advice we have emphasised so many times before. Face coverings, avoiding crowded places, cleaning your hands and surfaces, keeping 2 metres distance from people from other households, and self-isolating and getting tested immediately if you have symptoms. All of these things still work in reducing the transmission of this new strain. The new variant has made them more important than ever, and they are how we keep each other safe. So wherever you are, I would ask everyone to assume that the virus, and especially this new strain of it, is there with you, and to act in a way that will minimise the chances of spread. That's especially important because, and this is the real reason for hope, tens of thousands of people in Scotland have already been vaccinated against COVID. The updated figures will be published tomorrow. And of course, they include many of the people who were most at risk of dying from this virus. And as we do the difficult things in the weeks ahead to suppress the virus all over again, this time we are buying time for the vaccination programme to pick up pace. Though it might feel in the next few weeks that things are getting worse, and I know that in terms of health, jobs, living standards, that will be a reality for many. The fact is that things will also be getting better. The vaccines will be making sure of that, and they really do promise a route back to greater normality for all of us. In the past 9 months or so, we have come through a lot together, and I know the realisation that we have tough times still to come is really hard to bear. It's hard emotionally, it's hard practically, and for so many, it's very hard financially. The Scottish Government will continue to do all we can to offer help and support. But brighter days will come. Yesterday, in fact, was the shortest and darkest day of the year. From now on, the days get longer and lighter. Spring is on its way, and let's try to hold on to that. And for the moment, let's remember that the best gift we can give this Christmas to those we love is to keep them safe. So please follow the rules, remember facts, and look out for each other. At Christmas, just as we have done throughout this year, let's treat each other with kindness, compassion and love. I fully appreciate that this may not be the happiest of Christmases for everyone, but I do want to take the opportunity today, Presiding Officer, to wish everyone a peaceful and a healthy Christmas.
Thank you very much. The First Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 45 minutes for questions, after which we will move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press their request to speak buttons now. I call Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week's news has undeniably been a setback when we thought a corner had been turned in the fight against this virus. The promise of a vaccine and the chance to see loved ones again, even only for a brief time over Christmas, gave people real hope for a respite. And it seems doubly cruel to have plans snatched away from them, even if they understand why. And most people do. They understand the need to make sacrifices to suppress this new strain, but in return they are demanding as much clarity from this government as is conceivably possible. The national Tier 4 lockdown scheduled for Boxing Day will have come as an even greater shock to those people in Tiers 1 and 2 who had no previous indication that they'd be facing the most severe restrictions seen since March. They are asking whether the tier system has now been abandoned for good, or whether we can expect a return to more localised restrictions, and if so, when. And parents everywhere, now scrambling to cancel Christmas plans and find ways to balance work and childcare well into the new year, need clarity on exactly what is expected of them now the return to schools and nurseries has been suspended until the 18th. This doesn't just impact on their family life, it affects their ability to work and pay the bills. People accept that there is much about this new strain that we don't yet know, but they are growing weary of seeing supposedly time-limited fire breaks stretching into months. They will be rightly concerned to have just heard the First Minister say that the 18th January return date is under review. So can the First Minister give parents at home an idea of how likely it will be that children will return to classrooms from the 18th of January, or do they need to start preparing now for a long haul of blended learning at home?
First Minister.
I will do as I have tried to do every day over the past 10 months, and that is give people as much clarity as I possibly can. I will do that every day over the Christmas and New Year period if that is what is necessary and there are updates I can reasonably give to people. But I've also tried to be frank. We are dealing with a virus that we have always known to be unpredictable, but we have discovered just in the last few days how unpredictable it can be. We do not yet understand everything about this new strain. We have scientists literally as we speak trying to understand to what extent it is more transmissible, to understand who it may be more likely to transmit to, and to understand and hopefully be able to confirm beyond any doubt that it doesn't cause more severe illness and that it will not undermine vaccines or treatments. So over the days to come, and literally over the days to come, I think we will learn more about this. The other thing we've got to give ourselves assurance of over this next period is that the restrictions and measures we have in place are sufficient to suppress it. It took a really strict lockdown earlier in the year to get the R number back below 1. It got to about 0.6. And we face a situation now where R is around 1 again, lower in Scotland than it is in some other parts of the UK. And we have a virus that is transmitting more quickly and may in itself add 0.4 to R. That shows the scale of the challenge we've got. So we have to give ourselves time to know that we are taking the right actions to suppress it. We will learn more, and I will share as much as we know with the public as openly as possible. On the two specific points, I know how devastating it would have been for everybody on Saturday to hear that we were going to level 4 across most of the country on Saturday. That would have been particularly devastating for those areas in the lower levels. But it is really important for me to be clear. This is not action that is in response to current rates of prevalence. This is preventative action because we see a train coming rapidly down the track at us and we're trying to get out of its way. That's why the whole of mainland Scotland has to go to level 4 to prevent what we think will be a rapidly deteriorating situation. And lastly, on education and childcare, we will, if it is at all possible, get schools back open again on the 18th of January. That has been a priority. It continues to be a priority for all the reasons we understand and I think all of us agree on. And if that means the rest of us living under more severe restrictions, then we will not shy away from saying that as well. But we have to give ourselves the time to understand this virus a little bit more. One of the things that the scientists are exploring right now is whether this virus is transmitting more easily to young people. Now, there is no consensus on that right now, and there is no definitive conclusion on that, but it is one of the things that is currently being explored by the scientific community. So we will do everything we can to get the whole country back to normal as quickly as possible. But this next period, it is really important that all of us really do all of these things to help bring that about. And as I say, I will keep the country updated as far as possible right throughout the Christmas period.
I call on Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's clear that the government's strategic framework, launched less than 2 months ago, was at the weekend abandoned. The decision to move every part of mainland Scotland to level 4 from Boxing Day for an indefinite period, meaning the closure of all hospitality, all pubs and restaurants, all non-essential retail, all public buildings, all gyms, all indoor tourism attractions, all museums and galleries for an indefinite period is a drastic move. And this time, 3 weeks does not sound like 3 weeks, but considerably longer. The First Minister has told us that this is a proportionate public health response given the virulence of the new strain of the virus. So will the First Minister also make a proportionate response in other ways? Will she step up government support for businesses, workers and families across Scotland directly affected by this government decision? Will the government step up levels of support for mental health and mental well-being services? And if the new strain of the virus is 70% more transmissible than the original virus, will the government urgently increase the number of daily tests carried out in Scotland by 70%, improve the capacity, utilisation and performance of Test and Protect by 70%? And will the First Minister commit today, as soon as it is practically possible, to a 70% acceleration in the rollout of the vaccination programme?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I hope people will forgive me. I'm, like many people across the country, probably feeling a bit overtired at the moment, but words almost fail me in response to that. I have to be perfectly honest. Firstly, and sorry, I should have given this answer partly in relation to Ruth Davidson, we have not abandoned the strategic framework. We will try to get back to a levels approach where we apply levels to different parts of the country depending on the prevalence of the virus as quickly as we possibly can. So we haven't abandoned our strategic approach. What we have done is not stand there static, clinging to an approach where we've got a train coming down the track that is going to run us over. We've decided to respond to the evidence that we have a new strain of the virus that none of us saw coming, none of us predicted that this would happen right now. And like all other parts of the UK, like other countries, right now Ireland has just decided stringent new measures, even although they don't yet have identified cases of this virus. We have decided to respond in a preventative, precautionary way in order to make sure that by the end of January we don't have a health service that has been overwhelmed, that we haven't run out of hospital beds and ICU beds. Instead, we have managed to ward this off and suppress the virus again. And I am so sorry that we are having to do this, but I would be even sorrier and people would have every right to be very, very angry at me if I didn't take this action and let the country just deal with the impact of what is coming down the track at us. So I will continue to try to take the difficult but necessary decisions to keep us as safe as I possibly can. Yes, we will continue to look at how we step up support. I said in my statement the Finance Secretary is already urgently looking at business support to see what more we can do. That will be true across a range of responsibilities. In terms of Richard Leonard's final 2 points, that, I'm afraid, is where words start to fail me. We have plenty of testing capacity. We are building up our testing capacity. These are not simple equations with about a virus being 70% more transmissible, meaning we need 70% more test capacity. The reason I can give some of the detail that I give every day right now is because we are testing so many people, and we will continue to make sure we've got that capacity. We're also rolling out lateral flow testing, although one of the things that we need to assure ourselves of is that lateral flow testing is sensitive enough in the face of this new strain. But on the vaccine, we will roll this vaccine out just as quickly as supplies allow us to do. You know, I cannot, and you know, nobody would love more than me to be able to magic vaccine supplies out of nowhere. I cannot do that, unfortunately. So we are working hard to make sure that as soon as the supplies come, we've got the supplies we expected from the Pfizer vaccine this year. Tens of thousands of people have already had their first dose of the vaccine. We're hoping that other vaccines will get approval in the UK shortly, and as soon as those supplies become available, we will get those vaccines to people and get those doses of vaccines into as many arms as we can. But we are dependent on the vaccine developers, the companies, the supply chains allowing us to do that, and I really would hope that Richard Leonard would understand that.
I call on Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I share, of course, the dismay that we all feel at this increasingly dangerous situation. If the new strain is established and growing in Scotland, then it seems clear that much of the country must be prepared to deal with a heightened threat over the months ahead, not just over the weeks ahead. And there remains, as the First Minister said, an open question about the suggestion that this new strain could be more infectious to children and young people. The Greens have consistently backed measures to improve safety in schools, and we welcome the announcement of the delay to the new term. We all want to keep schools open, but not at all costs. Does the First Minister recognise that many teachers and school staff already feel that their safety has not been prioritised during the pandemic, and that at the very least their call for widespread routine testing should be accepted? How does the First Minister respond to the recent EIS comment that moving back to level 4 should result in the government considering moves toward blended or remote learning? Schools, they say, cannot stay open at all costs. The safety of pupils and staff has to be the priority. And can the First Minister update the Parliament on what action is being taken to protect vulnerable teachers when schools finally do return?
First Minister.
These are all important issues. Firstly, yes, I do accept that many teachers feel as if their safety has not been prioritised. What I don't accept is that that is true from the government's perspective, but if teachers feel that, then I recognise and accept that we continue to have work to do to assure and to reassure them, and we will continue to do that. We are looking at, and have been for the last few weeks, and are developing plans for more mass testing in schools in the new year. We are trying to do that sensibly and on a sustainable basis. Some of the plans that have been set out in other parts of the UK, as we have seen from the reaction of teachers themselves in recent days, perhaps haven't got that sense of deliverability and sustainability, but that is very clearly a part of our thinking. I did say earlier on in relation to Richard Leonard, and it's worth repeating here, that one of the, at the moment, and I hope this will be clarified in a positive way very soon, but at the moment, one of the questions we are seeking to have answered is whether lateral flow testing devices are effective against this new strain of the virus. But teacher safety, pupil safety, the safety of everybody who works in our schools is a priority. And I think that we have taken public health advice every step of the way. And while I recognise the concerns, I think the fact that we have managed to keep schools open while keeping prevalence of the virus at a lower level than many other areas is a success. But the new development means that we have to be precautionary till we learn more about the virus, not least till we learn more about this issue of transmissibility amongst young people. So we will be precautionary and we will take great care over the decisions we take. In terms of blended learning, I think it's in the interest of young people to be back in school full-time as quickly as possible, but you should, of course, hear everything I've just said about precaution and safety. The fact of the matter is it has always been the case that blended learning is there as an option on a school-by-school basis if it is required, and that will continue to be the case. We will not compromise or gamble with the safety of teachers and young people, but I think everybody recognises that it is in the interest of young people to be in school full-time, if at all possible, and that's what we want to get back to as quickly as this virus allows.
Willie Rennie.
We appreciate the reasons for the decisions at the weekend. When the science speaks so starkly, plans do need to change. Will the First Minister be reviewing the range of indicators as we learn more about the new strain of the virus? And on hospitals, at least 135,000 operations were cancelled earlier this year in the lockdown. And we know that for safety reasons, hospitals have limited the number of elective surgery operations since then. But I'm concerned about reports that ever greater numbers of operations have been cancelled, that some hospitals have cancelled all non-urgent procedures, and that some NHS boards are considering following suit. So what can the First Minister tell me more about that? And does she expect more NHS boards will cancel all non-urgent operations in the near future?
First Minister.
We were already reviewing the indicators. I think I set that out in my statement last week, so we will continue with that process over the Christmas period, and obviously we'll come back to Parliament with the outcome of that. We were taking the opportunity to review the indicators, but also the content of each levels, and as I said today, this new development makes it all the more urgent that we look at the content of level 4 restrictions and whether the current restrictions are sufficient. In terms of Health Board capacity and decisions on elective treatment, we want as much elective treatment to continue. We want to get back to normal in as much of that as possible, and that is a priority. We discussed that at the Cabinet meeting that we had earlier today. But this does depend on our ability to suppress this virus. To put it bluntly, the more patients that require hospital treatment and intensive care treatment for COVID, and the more staff that are required to support that, and of course the greater the levels of infection, the more hospital and NHS staff generally are likely to be off sick, because like the rest of the population they are more likely to be having that, then the less able the NHS will be to do normal business. But we are supporting the NHS to get that balance as right as possible. I cannot guarantee that no NHS board or no hospital will have to postpone elective treatment, but we are trying to support the NHS through this as much as possible to reduce the backlog of this year and to stop that backlog as far as possible rising any further. But I suppose my closing point here would be a plea to everybody. All of us can help the NHS right now. It goes back to the early part of this pandemic when we all acted in a way that was to protect our NHS. The NHS needs us to do that again. It needs us all in our personal behaviour to do everything we can to suppress this virus. That's what all of us can do to try to keep our NHS safe.
Thank you. I'm keen to get in every questioner if I possibly can, and I would appreciate the assistance of all concerned to achieve that. Can I call Bruce Crawford to be followed by Jamie Green?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, at this crucial time when dealing with a deadly and unseen killer virus, how important does the Scottish Government view the relationship between European Centre for Disease Control and the medical and scientific expert community in the UK? And does it not feel hardly in the extreme to sever this important relationship because of Brexit at this crucial moment in time, when as a country we are dealing with a deeply serious public health emergency, and for this reason alone, an extension to the Brexit period would make absolute common sense?
First Minister.
Well, it's vital that the UK, in my view, maintains its current access to the European Centre for Disease Control and Prevention. It's an important network of cross-border health expertise. It is also a source of very valuable data. There's probably not a day goes by right now when I don't look at the data on its website because it is extremely important, but it's important obviously for many more reasons than that. It is a fact that a no-deal Brexit scenario will jeopardise that access. I think that is highly concerning as we continue to fight the COVID pandemic. The Scottish Government is working with the UK Government to maintain access and to try to ensure that practical arrangements are in place as a stopgap in the event of no deal. The consequences of ending the Brexit transition period during a pandemic were predictable and predicted, and those concurrent risks adding up to a perfect storm are actually starting to become very real before our very eyes. That was evident in the COBRA meeting yesterday as we were dealing with all of the implications of the closure of the border happening now. Brexit plans being activated, stockpiles already being activated, when we may face all of this again in just a few days' time. So I really do hope that although they rejected this yesterday, the UK Government will think again and act responsibly. Businesses, citizens, everybody need preferably a deal now, but more important, they need a period where we will not have any self-inflicted disruption when we've got so much inevitable and unavoidable disruption to deal with.
Jamie Green, to be followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you. I've read the many letters being sent to parents today about access to the learning hubs, and it's clear from those letters that the definition of key worker is vague. It varies from council to council and will clearly result in a postcode lottery of childcare come January. They're also stating that both parents must be key workers to qualify for the hubs, which puts many of our frontline workers in an impossible situation. So can I ask why there is no clear countrywide guidance over access to these hubs? And what is the First Minister's message to those families who are facing the unenviable choice of being either out of pocket or out of a job?
First Minister.
The reason why the guidance is as it is that local authorities requested flexibility to put in place their own local arrangements, and I would appeal to local authorities to continue to liaise very closely with parents to make sure that their arrangements are as they need to be. This is an incredibly difficult time for everybody. It is a particularly difficult time for parents who are trying again to juggle the demands of work with the demands of childcare. Obviously, even in level 4, if there are no other options, then there is access to childcare and informal childminding and informal childcare arrangements. But we encourage local authorities to make sure that they are as expansive as possible in the definitions they use for key workers. The most important thing all of us need to try to do, led of course by the actions the government is taking, is to get this virus and this new strain in particular under control and suppressed as much and as far as we can, so that this next period of these most stringent restrictions impacting particularly on schools and childcare will be as short as it is feasible for it to be.
Annabel Ewing, to be followed by Alec Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. People in my Cowdenbeath constituency across Fife and indeed Scotland will want to have as much clarity as it is possible about the weeks that lie ahead. Can the First Minister therefore confirm on what date the review of the 3-week level 4 regime to apply to the whole of mainland Scotland from Boxing Day will take place, on the basis of what criteria the review will be conducted, and when the upshot of that review will be communicated to the public? Thank you.
First Minister.
We will carry out the review 2 weeks after the commencement of these on Boxing Day, and I will set out the outcome of that in Parliament on that day. Forgive me, I'm probably going to get the dates wrong. I think that will be on the 12th of January. And we will be as clear as we can be about the reasons for the decisions we take in that review, and we will try to keep level 4 restrictions as short as possible. I want to give people as much clarity as possible, but while I understand the desire for clarity, it's a normal human desire that I share and also want to deliver on. I don't think people want me just to say things that perhaps I think they want to hear right now that then have to be reversed later on. I think we have to try and set out the situation as clearly as possible to people as we go along, explaining the implications and explaining the difficulties as we go. And that's what I will try to do even over this next period, or perhaps especially over this next period when people will be worried about the situation that will pertain at the start of the year.
Alec Rowley, to be followed by Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, you've said that scientists are investigating claims that this new variant of the virus spreads more easily in children. Indeed, they say this could account for a significant proportion of the increase of the transmission in the south of England. So in light of this, what steps will the Scottish Government take to examine that evidence, and what actions will you take to ensure that there is effective teaching and learning through blended methods if any further delays to return to schools are necessary? And what steps will the Government take to provide greater support for those in most need and at greatest risks when our schools are closed?
First Minister.
I think the operative word in the early part of Alec Rowley's question there rightly was could. There is not yet a definitive consensus amongst experts about whether it is the case that this new strain of the virus is more likely to infect children, but it is something that is under active exploration. The Chief Medical Officer updated Cabinet today on that, made very clear that that was not something we could be definitive about right now, and I have read accounts just this morning of scientific opinion saying that they are pretty certain this is the case, and other scientific opinion saying that they don't think it is. So we need to wait and see what the consensus that emerges is. We have contingency arrangements in place for blended learning. One of the reasons that we have taken the precautionary approach to the start of the new term is because of the uncertainty around this new strain, and we will have arrangements for blended learning for as long as that is necessary. We hope that is as short a time as possible. We've already taken steps to help those in more deprived communities with online access and in other ways, and we will continue to do that, particularly if, and I hope it is not, we are facing a lengthier period where children are not in school full-time.
Christine Graham, to be followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I refer to your statement in particular that the incidence of COVID in Scotland is half that of England and that the cross-border travel ban will be in place on Christmas Day. Given that the Chief Constable has ruled out roadblocks and checkpoints, and I appreciate these are operational decisions for him, are you satisfied the law can be enforced, and have you been advised what policing is taking place across the English side of the border?
First Minister.
Can I just be clear on one point, because I'm just aware that maybe how I'm expressing this gives rise to a misleading impression. It's not the case that this travel ban between Scotland and the rest of the UK is only in place on Christmas Day. It is in place for the foreseeable future, including Christmas Day. The travel restrictions, although we are not encouraging people to travel to meet indoors if at all possible, but the travel restrictions are lifted on Christmas Day in Scotland, but that does not apply to travel between Scotland and the rest of the UK. It is, of course, an operational matter for the Chief Constable to decide how and to what extent to enforce this law. Obviously, I've discussed it with the Chief Constable. He joined me yesterday for the daily update. He has taken decisions to double patrols and has set out very clearly the approach the police will take. And I have confidence in the ability of the police to enforce where necessary, just as they have done with the regulations throughout the pandemic. Obviously, it's not for me to comment on policing on the English side of the border, but I'm sure the police there are cognisant of these arrangements as well. The last point I would make here, and it's a point I made yesterday and will continue to make, people should abide by these restrictions, not because they are likely to get stopped by the police if they don't. They should abide by these restrictions because they are there to keep us all safe. When we get in a car these days and put on a seatbelt, I don't think many of us do that in case we get caught not wearing a seatbelt. We do that because we know it can save our lives, and people should see these restrictions in the same way. They're a tough aspect of what we're being asked to do right now, but they are necessary to stop any more, as far as we can, of this strain of the virus coming into Scotland as we do all these difficult things to suppress it here.
Donald Cameron, to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you. The First Minister may be aware of reports that the University Hospital Wishaw has closed a number of wards to new admissions following a spike in COVID-19 admissions. Can the First Minister provide Parliament with an update on the general capacity in our hospitals, given that when standard admissions are suspended, it puts further pressure on the NHS due to the already significant backlog of operations and appointments?
First Minister.
I'll ask the Health Secretary to write to the member and to copy this to all members, just to give an update before we get into the Christmas period of hospital capacity and what pressures there are On that, it is, of course, for individual health boards to manage any capacity pressures that they have, and we do know that Lanarkshire, like Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and more recently Grampian, are having significant pressure from COVID generally. That's been the case in Borders in terms of the NHS in recent days as well. Overall, the capacity in the health sector, if we look at the numbers I've given today for those in hospital and those in intensive care, they are significantly below overall capacity. They're also below the peak levels we saw earlier in the year. There are some parts of the UK where both of these things, certainly in hospital capacity and in some cases ICU capacity, have already exceeded that peak. So we are not in a position where we can be complacent. We are working with the NHS to manage this, but I come back to that central point that the more we can stop this strain of the virus taking hold, then the more ability we will have to ensure that our NHS can cope with COVID patients, but also, as they are doing that, continue to treat people with non-COVID conditions as well.
Willie Coffey, to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you. Can I ask the First Minister to elaborate on the discussions her government has had with the UK government regarding the temporary closure of our major ports and transport links? And will she call on the UK government to take some responsibility and work to reach agreement with France on the protocol that she mentioned earlier that will get freight moving again for the sake of Scotland's valuable seafood sector as the situation is becoming critical?
First Minister.
I took part in a COBRA meeting yesterday where these issues were discussed. I was concerned yesterday and remain concerned today that the timescale for both the agreement of a protocol with France, but perhaps more particularly the implementation of that agreement may take more time than, frankly, our seafood sector has. We will continue to press the UK government to take all necessary steps, but also, more importantly, we will ensure that we are offering any help and support. One of the things that we don't know yet, unless there may well have been developments in this since we've been in the chamber that I am not aware of, but one of the unknown questions is if this solution, as I think it almost certainly will do, involves mass testing of drivers, whether that will be PCR testing or lateral flow testing. So once we know that, we can look at the arrangements we can put in place to test drivers in Scotland before they start their journey. So we will do everything we can to help. We will continue to liaise with the seafood sector. It's in everybody's interest to see this resolved just as quickly as possible. Do you want to maybe keep it down?
Jackie Bailey, to be followed by Joan McAlpine.
Hospitality and tourism businesses in my constituency and across Scotland face huge bills in January, whether it's payment of self-assessment, deferred VAT or national insurance and pension contributions for staff who are currently on furlough, and they have no income over the next 3 weeks over what is normally their busiest period. They are saying they need a greater level of support from both the Scottish and UK governments, and they need it now. So will the First Minister adopt a targeted approach and increase the help provided?
First Minister.
Well, as I said in my statement, I think I've said since then in response to questions, the Finance Secretary is urgently looking at what more we can do. There is significant financial support already available, and I would encourage all affected businesses to apply for that. The details are available on local government websites and indeed, I believe, on the Scottish Government website. But we do recognise there is more help that businesses are going to need given the implications of what we are now dealing with and likely to be dealing with into the new year. And the Finance Secretary will report back on that once she's had the opportunity to complete that assessment.
Joan McAlpine, to be followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The First Minister knows that Gretna is the wedding capital of Scotland and it's also in a lower prevalence area. I have been contacted by a number of constituents in Gretna and East Annandale concerned that wedding guests are travelling from higher prevalence parts of the UK, such as the south of England, despite the cross-border travel ban, as Level 1 Dumfries and Galloway, both weddings and small receptions are permitted. Can the First Minister explain how moving to Level 4 areas across Scotland will protect my constituents in the Gretna area? And given that there are many local jobs involved, how will the wedding industry and its supply chain be supported under Level 4 restrictions?
First Minister.
Well, this is a really tough time for the wedding industry across the country, and that is undoubtedly particularly true in Gretna. We've recently allocated funding for the sector and its supply chain, and we'll seek to ensure that those who have had little or in some cases no support since March are particularly targeted for that support. I deeply regret the fact that trade like this, cross-border trade and the impact on particular sectors and businesses is unavoidable right now. But it is unavoidable because stopping travel, both within Scotland and from Scotland to other parts of the UK, is a key part of trying not to spread this strain any further. We know it already exists in Scotland and we have to suppress it here, but we think it is still at lower levels, and therefore it's really important to stop importing any more of it. And that's true for the entirety of Scotland, but obviously that has particular resonance in terms of the border parts of both Scotland and England. So we don't want these restrictions to be in place for any longer than necessary, but they are necessary right now, which is why I encourage everybody to strictly abide by them.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
The increased restrictions that the First Minister announced on Saturday is causing a great deal of concern for Scotland's tourism businesses, many of which were already worried, even with the belated support for the sector the Finance Secretary announced a couple of weeks ago. So can I ask the First Minister, when will the first payments from that support be in the hands of these businesses? And will the impact of these increased restrictions be reflected in this and in any future additional packages of support for our beleaguered tourism industry?
First Minister.
Of course, the restrictions we announced, regrettably so, reflect restrictions that are unfortunately in place in all parts of the UK and indeed in many, many other parts of the world right now. We have to be very clear that while the impact on business is understood and it is severe and it is heartbreaking, we would make that impact worse if we didn't act appropriately to try to suppress the virus. That obviously brings responsibilities on us to make sure that businesses are appropriately supported. I've already said the Finance Secretary is looking again at additional support for business. She has just recently announced additional funding for tourism in particular, and the processes are underway to get that money flowing to businesses as quickly as possible. For tourism, perhaps more than for any other sector in our economy, the support that will be required is not just likely to be greater than they're getting right now, but longer term as well. This is a sector that has been deeply affected, which is why the Tourism Task Force looked not just at immediate measures, but at medium and long-term support as well. And the Tourism Minister and the Cabinet is fully engaged in making sure that we respond appropriately.
Thank you. Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, given that no ferries will run on Christmas Day, will islanders and their loved ones on the mainland be allowed to visit each other from Christmas Eve to Boxing Day? Only a very small minority of people will actually travel, so the risk must be tiny. It's surely unfair that this minority of islanders and their families will be denied the same opportunities as everyone else to spend Christmas Day together, and a number of my island constituents and mainland constituents have expressed their dismay should they have been able to do so.
First Minister.
I know it's unfair. It is unfair. This virus is unfair to everybody, but that's the point. It's not fair, and we're having to take decisions now that are very, very difficult for people, and we cannot give exemptions to these rules, because every small exemption that is given, other than really necessary ones for people who need to care for people, all add up to greater risk of this virus spreading. I said this yesterday, I spent quite a lot of time on Saturday night when I got home after making these horrible announcements, reading emails that people had sent me. Most of them were people who understood the necessity, but they were also setting out, often in heartbreaking terms, the impact on them and their families. I can't take away that impact for everybody. I dearly wish I could, but I do want people to know that I understand it and that we will do everything we can within the bounds of what we need to do to keep this virus suppressed to try to mitigate the impact. But none of this is fair on anybody right now.
Pauline McNeill, to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Can the First Minister share the modelling on the vaccine rollout? So I'm aware from question and answer yesterday that Clinical Director Jason Leach has said, well, we plan to vaccinate more than 4 million Scots. But I wondered if the First Minister can share at any time where we might expect to be in January, March, February. Is there a date in June, for example, that you're aiming for. And I fully appreciate that I'm asking for modelling and these are just plans. And I just wondered if at any point the First Minister could share with us where we might expect to be.
First Minister.
I'm not sure this is a question for modelling. This is about how we match the supply of the vaccine to those groups that we need to vaccinate. I believe there was information that set out these timelines circulated to MSPs last week or the week before. I know the Health Secretary is making a statement tomorrow and will give the up-to-date information. In broad terms, our objective, assuming we get the supplies that we are expecting in the timescale that we are expecting them, is that JCVI priority list that has been published so far, which broadly speaking is everybody aged 50 and above, will have been vaccinated by the spring this year. But obviously that is still subject to uncertainty because of the inherent uncertainties around supply. After that, into the summer, we are hoping that we will be in a position to move on to the rest of the population, because of course this is a vaccination programme that is intended to reach everybody in the adult population. But we are dependent on the supplies coming through, and we will keep Parliament updated as greater certainty and clarity around that becomes more concrete.
Claire Adamson, to be followed by Annie Wells.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what discussions the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government on the security of medicine supplies in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Many families will be concerned seeing the scenes from Kent at the moment. And does the First Minister agree with me that the most pragmatic approach and safest approach for everyone would be for the UK Government to seek a Brexit transition extension so that we could avoid some of these problems?
First Minister.
Well, we discussed the issues of medicine supply at length, both at COBRA yesterday, but also at the Scottish Government Resilience Committee. I think the Health Secretary is indicating to me she has further Four Nations discussions later this week on that very issue. As I said in my statement, we have no immediate concerns about supplies of medicines or medical supplies, and we have no immediate concerns about supplies of the COVID vaccines. Obviously, we require to keep all of that under very close review. The discussions we were having yesterday to some extent were inevitable. This is a new strain of the virus that has led other countries to respond, and therefore the issues around the border there are part of dealing with this particular crisis, and I think we all understand the necessity of that. What is less easy, I think, for us to understand and certainly for us to accept is having to discuss these things in the context of something that is completely self-inflicted. And therefore I do hope that we see measures taken, whatever they require to be, to avoid any disruption caused by Brexit over this next 2-week period. Frankly, the country has got enough on its plate to deal with right now. We're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with a new strain of COVID, we're trying to get a vaccination programme rolled out. We are going into winter. We may be, over the next few weeks, dealing with severe weather as well. We do not need the disruption that Brexit will bring, and I really do hope the UK Government do whatever it takes to avoid that.
Annie Wells, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, recently the Equality and Human Rights Commission said it found that throughout the pandemic, clear evidence the rights of Scotland's care home residents and staff had been ignored by Scottish Government ministers. They said the need to uphold the rights of residents to be treated equally, with dignity and with respect, have not been taken into account. Meanwhile, care home staff, despite their best efforts, have been ill-equipped to provide vital support and care to residents, many of who were nearing the end of life. The Scottish Conservatives agree with the Equality and Human Rights Commission that there must be a public inquiry into this matter. First Minister, what progress has been made in establishing this inquiry?
First Minister.
We've already committed to public inquiry. The Health Secretary is taking forward the plans for that. No public inquiry on any issue can simply be set up overnight. There are matters that take time to get right, the appointment of the judge who will oversee it, the remit, all of the other preparatory action. And as I think the Chief Executive of Scottish Care said not that long ago, these are all really important matters, but nothing matters more right now than dealing with the daily reality of this pandemic. That matters for vulnerable people in our care homes, it matters for their relatives, and it matters to the whole country. And that's what I'm going to keep my focus and the focus of my government on 100% of the time right now.
Bob Doris, to be followed by John Scott.
Presiding Officer, I have previously asked for a review of Level 4 restrictions to see greater flexibility at Level 4 around gyms, health and fitness, given their positive mental health impact. As the First Minister has suggested, a potential further toughening of Level 4 restrictions may be required, and I absolutely understand why. That flexibility is clearly unlikely to happen over the next few weeks. However, can I ask the First Minister, as we emerge from this latest challenge, and we will do so, will she consider future flexibilities at Level 4, even though, understandably, at the moment, that is clearly not the current direction of travel?
First Minister.
Yes, of course we will, and I absolutely understand the importance of physical exercise and activity to people's physical health, but also to their mental health. And while this pandemic, the focus of that is on protecting people's physical health, actually it's the mental health impact that we may well be living with for longer. So nobody is in any way oblivious to the real importance of having gyms open and encouraging and supporting people to take care of their physical health so that they can support their mental health. Unfortunately, I suspect that over the immediate period, we may have to look at tightening Level 4 restrictions rather than easing them. But hopefully, as we go further into next year, the opposite can be true, and absolutely making sure that people have access to physical activity will be absolutely at or very near the top of that list of priorities.
And finally, and briefly, please, John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Capacity in Ayrshire, and particularly concerns about IC bed capacity in Ayrshire and indeed across Scotland, and the lack of available staff for the Louisa Jordan units in the worst case scenarios. What reassurance can the First Minister give in keeping ICU beds available to the people of Ayrshire and Scotland, and provide details of how Louisa Jordan hospitals will be staffed if they are needed?
First Minister.
Well, we will continue to give details of that. We have very robust plans in place around escalation for intensive care. Right now, there is no pressure. Of course, there is pressure on intensive care, but we are not near running out of intensive care beds. We have still got plans that would allow us to increase ICU capacity. That is true across Scotland as a whole. For ICU, it is true for hospital beds. Individual health boards will face pressures at given times. Lanarkshire in recent weeks has faced probably the most acute pressure in that sense, and of course mutual aid arrangements will kick in between health boards as well. Thus far, we have not required to use the Louisa Jordan for COVID-related matters. We, at this stage, still do not consider that we will require to use that, but we will keep that under review, and should that change, we will set out the operational plans for that. The Louisa Jordan has, of course, been seeing patients, thousands of patients actually, helping with the reducing of the backlog. It would not be true to stand here and say, and it's true, it would not be true for the Health Secretary either, to say that we don't have concerns about hospital capacity. Part of what is driving the very tough action that we are taking right now is to protect our hospital capacity for COVID patients and for non-COVID patients. But right now, the Health Service is operating within that capacity, and we will continue to support it to do so.
Thank you very much. That concludes questions on the statement, and we will move on in a moment to the next item of business. Can I remind members that social distancing measures are in place in the Chamber and across the Holyrood campus, and please ask members to observe these measures during the course of this afternoon's business, including when entering and exiting the Chamber.